I never expected my parents to betray me like that, especially on the most important day of my life. My wedding day, a day that should have been filled with love, joy, and family. Instead, it was a day that changed everything. I had always imagined my parents walking me down the aisle, sitting proudly at the front, watching me marry the man I loved. But that dream was shattered when my mom pulled me aside the night before the wedding. She looked at me with eyes full of disappointment and said, "We won't be attending your wedding tomorrow. We're doing this to teach you humility." Those words stung deeper than anything I had ever heard. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Humility? I had worked my whole life to make them proud, and now they were punishing me for something I didn't even understand. My dad said nothing, just nodded in agreement. The silence that followed was deafening. I tried to hold it together, to understand what had led them to this decision, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. The worst part was, they didn't even seem to care about the hurt they were causing. They just turned their backs on me, as if I was nothing. I could hardly breathe, let alone process what was happening. My heart was racing as I stared at them, searching for some sign that they would change their minds, but there was nothing. They were set in their decision. The next day, I went through with the wedding, but it was hard to focus on anything but the hole in my chest. I looked around at the people who were supposed to be my family, and there was no sign of them. It was as if they had never been a part of my life. I tried to enjoy the day, but every moment felt like an empty space, a reminder of the betrayal I had just experienced. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, Jake, my husband, pulled me aside after the ceremony. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low. I could see the concern in his eyes. I had no idea what was coming next. He told me that the truth about what had happened the night before was much worse than I could have imagined. My parents hadn't just decided to skip the wedding. They had been plotting behind my back for months. My dad had secretly told Jake that they would never accept me marrying him. They thought he wasn't good enough for me, that I was making a mistake. They had tried everything to stop the wedding from happening, even threatening to cut me off completely if I went through with it. The pain of hearing those words was like a slap to the face. My parents, the people who had raised me, who had always told me that family was everything, had been planning to destroy my happiness all along. They didn't want me to have a life of my own, to build a future with someone I loved. They wanted to control every part of my life. I felt my world crash down around me. The betrayal was more than just the wedding. It was everything I thought I knew about my family. Jake held me as I cried, but even in his arms, I felt completely alone. The person I had trusted the most had been plotting against me, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. I spent the entire night trying to make sense of what had just happened. The words my parents had said, the way they just turned their backs on me, nothing felt real. I kept replaying the scene over and over in my mind, trying to understand how we had gone from being a close-knit family to this. Why would they do this to me? I didn't ask for much. I just wanted their support on my wedding day. That's all I wanted. I had always been the good daughter, doing everything they asked of me. But now, it felt like none of that mattered. My phone was silent, and so was my heart. I had expected to feel joy, excitement, and a sense of love today, but instead, all I felt was emptiness. Jake tried to comfort me, but even his words seemed distant, like they couldn't reach me in this hollow place I found myself in. He had told me everything his family had done to support us, to make sure the wedding was everything I wanted it to be, but it didn't matter. My parents weren't there. The absence of them left an aching void, and no matter how hard I tried to fill it, it just wouldn't go away. We went on with the ceremony, of course, but everything felt off. The people I thought I could always count on had disappeared from my life, and now I was standing there, married to the love of my life, but still feeling so alone. I couldn't understand how they could just walk away from me so easily. I thought family was supposed to stand by you, especially on the most important day of your life. I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that this was just a phase, but deep down, I knew that things would never be the same. As the night wore on, I started to feel the weight of their absence more and more. Every laugh, every toast, every smile, it all felt wrong. There was a space that could never be filled, no matter how many people filled the seats. Jake must have noticed the shift in my mood because he pulled me aside later in the evening. "Samantha," he said, his voice soft but full of concern. "What's really going on? I can see that you're not okay." I tried to brush it off, but the tears started to well up again. "It's just my parents," I whispered, I can't believe they did this to me. Jake sighed, his hand gently holding mine. I know. And I know this hurts more than you're letting on, but you can't let them control your happiness anymore. This is your life now. Your marriage. Don't let them take that away from you. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But how could I just forget what they did? How could I forget the years of love and care I had given them, only to have them shut me out when I needed them the most? I thought that after all this time, they would finally see me as an adult, as someone capable of making her own decisions. But instead, they chose to humiliate me, to make me feel small. My parents had always been the foundation of my world, and now they were nothing more than a painful reminder of everything I had lost. It was in that moment, sitting in Jake's arms, that I realized something. I couldn't keep trying to please them. I couldn't keep bending over backward for people who didn't care about me. And I certainly couldn't allow their actions to define me. My wedding day had turned into something unrecognizable, but I was determined that my future wouldn't be. This was the first step of letting go. It was hard. It still is. But I knew then that I had to move forward. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of their expectations. I had to live for me. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to come to terms with what had happened. The wedding was over, but the aftermath was still crushing me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my mother's words echoing in my mind. We're doing this to teach you humility. It felt like a slap in the face, and no matter how hard I tried to let go of it, it stuck to me like glue. Jake was supportive, as always, but I could see the pain in his eyes too. He hated seeing me like this, but there wasn't much he could do to make it better. I had always been close to my parents, and this betrayal stung more than anything. They had been my rock, my foundation, and now they were gone. It felt like a part of me had been ripped away. I kept telling myself that I needed to move on, that I couldn't let them control me anymore. But the reality was, it wasn't that simple. The next few weeks were a blur of conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I didn't have to answer to them anymore. I didn't have to play by their rules. But on the other hand, I felt utterly alone. I had always sought their approval, and now I realized that seeking it was what had been holding me back all these years. I wasn't the person I thought I was. I was still that little girl trying to prove herself worthy of their love. Jake and I tried to go on with life as normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The house was quieter without my parents' calls, without their visits. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Every time I walked into a room, it felt empty. I started thinking about all the moments I had missed with them, all the times. I had put their needs before my own. I had given so much to them, and now I was left with nothing. Jake could see how much it was eating at me. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, he asked me if I was okay. I'm fine, I said, but I knew I wasn't. No, you're not, he replied, his voice gentle but firm. You're not okay, and it's okay to admit that. It was like a switch flipped inside of me. For the first time since the wedding, I allowed myself to feel everything. I broke down, crying harder than I had ever cried before. I cried for the loss of my family, for the years I had wasted trying to earn their love, for the realization that they didn't care enough to support me when I needed them the most. And as I cried, Jake held me close, offering the kind of comfort my parents never could. In that moment, I realized that no matter what happened with my parents, I had Jake. I had the love of my life by my side, and that was all that mattered. I still didn't know how to move forward, how to heal from the wounds my parents had caused, but I knew I couldn't let them define me anymore. I had to find my own path, one that didn't rely on their approval or their love. It was going to be hard, but I was ready to fight for my own happiness. For the first time in my life, I was going to live for me. I spent days trying to move on, but the feeling of betrayal lingered in my heart like a heavy weight. Every time I passed by a picture of my parents, I felt a pang of pain. I wanted to forget what had happened, to let go of the anger and sadness, but it was so much harder than I had imagined. I couldn't shake the thought that, despite everything I had done for them, it had never been enough. I had tried so hard to be the perfect daughter, to live up to their expectations, and all I had gotten in return was their absence on my wedding day. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was about the years I had spent trying to gain their approval, trying to prove that I was worthy of their love. I had spent so many moments putting them first, only to realize that I had been putting my happiness on the back burner all along. It felt like a cruel joke. Jake kept telling me that I shouldn't blame myself for their actions, that I had done nothing wrong, but it was hard to believe him. How could they just walk away from me so easily? How could they look me in the eye and say they didn't support my choice after everything we had been through together? I knew that I had to let go, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to. There was a part of me that still hoped things would go back to the way they were. I kept holding on to the hope that one day my parents would come around, that they would apologize and admit they had been wrong. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. As much as I wanted it, I couldn't change the past. I couldn't make them love me the way I wanted them to. I had to accept that my relationship with them had changed forever, and that was the hardest part. I didn't know how to accept that. I didn't know how to move forward without their support, without their love. But Jake was there, every step of the way, reminding me that I didn't need their approval to be happy. He loved me for who I was, not for who my parents thought I should be. That was all that mattered now. Slowly, I started to heal. It wasn't easy, and it took time, but with Jake by my side, I felt stronger. I started to realize that my worth wasn't defined by my parents, or anyone else for that matter. I was enough just as I was. It took a long time for me to believe that, but one day, I looked in the mirror and saw someone who had survived the pain, someone who had grown stronger because of it. It was then that I realized I could be happy again, that I didn't need anyone's permission to live my life the way I wanted to. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. I was ready to move forward, to build a life with Jake, without looking back. And as I did, I finally understood what true happiness meant. It was about letting go of the past, forgiving myself, and embracing the future with an open heart. I thought things were starting to settle, but the pain of the past never really fades. It's like a scar you forget about until something brushes against it, and suddenly, it's fresh all over again. Even with Jake by my side, the lingering emptiness from the way my parents had treated me was hard to ignore. I tried to keep my focus on our life together, but there were moments when the absence of their love felt like a constant shadow. I couldn't help but feel like I had failed them, even though they had been the ones who let me down. It wasn't rational, but grief isn't always logical. It's messy, and it doesn't always make sense. One afternoon, Jake and I decided to take a weekend trip to clear our minds. We drove up to the mountains, hoping the quiet and fresh air would give us the peace we needed. As we stood at the edge of a lake, watching the reflection of the trees ripple on the water, Jake turned to me. "I know this isn't easy for you," he said, his voice soft but steady. "But I need you to understand that you're not alone in this. I'm here, and I always will be." I felt the tears well up again, but this time, it wasn't from sorrow. It was from a realization I hadn't fully embraced before. I wasn't alone. I had Jake. I had people who cared about me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of warmth in my chest, a reminder that not all relationships were like the one I had with my parents. I wasn't defined by their actions, and I didn't need their approval to feel validated. It was a painful truth, but a freeing one. I had spent so much of my life living in the shadow of their expectations, and now I was stepping into the light of my own future. It wasn't going to be easy, and it would take time, but I was ready to let go of the past. The mountains felt like a metaphor for my journey. Solid, unmovable, yet vast and full of possibility. It was time to stop, looking back at what I had lost, and start focusing on what I had gained. My relationship with Jake was stronger than ever, and that was enough. He had shown me that I could love without needing to be loved in return. He had shown me that my worth wasn't tied to my parents' approval. For the first time in my life, I was learning to love myself, and that was the greatest gift I could give to myself. As we walked back to the car, I felt a sense of calm that had been missing for so long. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but I was ready to face them. With Jake by my side, there was nothing I couldn't overcome. I woke up the next morning feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The weight I had carried around for so long, this constant ache of rejection, was still there, but it felt lighter somehow. It was as though, by facing it head-on and acknowledging how much I had allowed my parents' actions to define me, I had started to take back control of my own life. Jake had given me that gift. It was his unwavering support that had helped me start to see myself not through the lens of my parents' expectations, but as my own person, worthy of love and happiness. I wasn't perfect, and neither was my marriage, but I was finally learning that that was okay. I didn't have to be perfect to be loved. I didn't have to meet anyone's standards but my own. The road ahead was still uncertain, But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about it. Later that day, we sat down for dinner, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like a real celebration. Not just of the meal we had prepared, but of the life we were building together. Jake looked at me with that familiar smile, the one that always made my heart skip a beat. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently, as if he could sense the peace that had settled over me. "I'm okay," I replied, my voice steady. "No, more than okay," I continued, looking up at him. "I'm ready. Ready to move forward, no matter what happens. With or without their approval. I'm ready to live for me." Jake squeezed my hand across the table, and for a moment, we just sat there, the weight of everything we had been through hanging in the air, but somehow not suffocating us. It was as if we had come to an unspoken understanding that the past was behind us, and the future, while unknown, was ours to shape. That night, after dinner, we decided to take a walk under the stars. The night was cool, the sky clear, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As we walked in silence, I realized that I had been given a second chance at happiness. Not just with Jake, but with myself. I didn't need my parents' approval to be the person I was meant to be. I didn't need them to validate my worth. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but in accepting that, I felt a peace settle deep inside me. The journey to healing wasn't going to be easy, but I was no longer afraid of it. I had Jake by my side, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand up for myself and let go of the toxic ties that had held me back for so long. I spent the next few weeks learning how to navigate the aftermath of everything that had happened. There were days when the weight of my parents' rejection still felt unbearable, and nights when I couldn't stop thinking about all the years I had spent trying to gain their approval. But with each passing day, I began to understand that healing was a process, not something that could happen overnight. I wasn't just healing from the wound they had inflicted on me, but from a lifetime of allowing their opinions to shape my self-worth. Jake was there through it all, but I knew that this journey was one I had to take on my own. I had to learn to love myself, to believe in myself, and to stop seeking validation from the people who had hurt me the most. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned if I had made the right choice in cutting them out of my life. I still wondered if I had been too harsh, too quick to sever ties with the people who had been my family for so long. But every time I felt that doubt creep in, I would remember how they had made me feel. I remembered the coldness in their eyes when they told me they wouldn't attend my wedding. I remembered the years of silent judgment, of them making me feel like I wasn't enough. I wasn't asking for much. I was asking for their support, their love, and instead, I had gotten their rejection. That was something I couldn't ignore. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I focused on the things that brought me joy, my work, my friendships, and most importantly, my marriage with Jake. We spent our weekends exploring new places, trying new things, and building memories together. I had come to realize that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes, it's the people who stand by you when the world falls apart. The ones who love you for who you truly are, not for who they want you to be. My relationship with Jake had become my anchor, and in his arms, I felt like I had finally found a place where I belonged. I was no longer the girl who sought approval from her parents. I was a woman who knew her worth, and for the first time in my life, I felt proud of who I had become. But even as I began to heal, there was still a part of me that longed for reconciliation. I knew that it wasn't possible right now, but deep down, I still hoped that one day my parents would realize their mistake and come back into my life. I didn't need them to validate me anymore, but a part of me still yearned for their love. It was a bittersweet feeling, but I had learned to accept it. I had to let go of the idea that I could change their minds. I had to accept that I could only control my own actions, my own feelings. And with that acceptance, I finally began to find peace. The journey wasn't over, but it was getting easier. I was learning how to let go of the past, to forgive, and to move forward. I had taken back my life, and now, I was ready to live it on my own terms. I had come a long way since the day I had confronted my parents. The pain was still there, lingering at the edges of my heart, but it was no longer consuming me. I had taken the time to heal, to rebuild myself from the inside out, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for me. I no longer felt like I needed my parents' approval to be happy. Jake had been my rock, my support, my partner in every sense of the word. Together, we had created a life that was ours, free from the expectations and judgments of others. But even as I had moved forward, there were still moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had tried to make peace with the fact that my parents might never come around, but the longing for their love still haunted me. I tried to suppress it, but it was always there, in the back of my mind. I found myself wondering what they were thinking, what they would say if they saw me now. Would they regret their actions? Would they ever apologize for how they treated me? I knew I couldn't wait around for answers that might never come, but it was hard to let go of the hope that one day they would see how much I had grown, how much I had changed. One afternoon, as Jake and I were enjoying a quiet moment at home, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, and for a brief moment, my heart skipped a beat. I hesitated before picking it up, unsure of what to expect. "Hello," I answered, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my chest. "Samantha?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took me a moment to place it. It was my mother. My heart sank. I hadn't heard from her in months, and I had no idea what she wanted now. "Yes, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I've been thinking about you," she said, her voice softer than I had expected. "I know things between us have been difficult, and I'm sorry for how everything turned out." I was stunned. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The last time we had spoken, she had turned her back on me, and now here she was, apologizing. "I just wanted to call and say that I love you, and I miss you," she continued. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I wanted to reach out." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, I couldn't respond. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me was relieved to hear her voice again, to know that she was thinking of me. But another part of me was still hurt, still angry. She had walked away from me when I needed her the most. And now, she was asking for forgiveness? I didn't know if I was ready to give it. "I appreciate your apology, Mom," I finally said, my voice steady. "But I need some time. I'm still processing everything." "I understand," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm here, whenever you're ready." The conversation ended shortly after that, and I sat in silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to chase after her approval. I didn't need her to validate me anymore. But hearing her words, I realized that forgiveness didn't mean I had to forget what had happened. It meant that I was ready to let go of the anger, to free myself from the past. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for healing, for rebuilding something with her. But for now, I knew that I had to focus on what mattered most, my own happiness, my own peace. Jake had given me the strength to face the past, and now, it was up to me to decide how to move forward. It was no longer about them. It was about me, about my future, about the life I had built with Jake. And that was enough. I had spent weeks processing my feelings and coming to terms with everything that had happened. The call from my mom had caught me off guard, and I found myself constantly reflecting on it. It was the first time in months that we had spoken, and I didn't know how to feel about the apology. Part of me was relieved, and yet, another part of me felt anger rise up again. It was the same feeling I had when I first confronted her, when I had felt like I was doing everything right, and yet, I was the one left behind. I wasn't sure what to do with this newfound connection. I was still uncertain about whether I could forgive her completely. Jake had been there through all of it, watching me wrestle with my emotions. I could tell he was worried. He knew how much the whole situation with my parents had affected me, but he never pushed me, never rushed me into a decision. "Take your time," he had said when I told him about the call. "It's your choice, and I'll support whatever you decide." His words comforted me more than he realized. It wasn't just his support that I was grateful for. It was the space he gave me to figure out who I was without the weight of my parents' approval. It wasn't easy, but with time, I started to see things clearly. I had spent so long trying to please them, trying to be someone they wanted me to be. But I realized that I had been ignoring my own voice. I had been ignoring what I wanted for myself. I didn't need their validation anymore. That was a hard pill to swallow, but it was also freeing. I had a life of my own now, and that life didn't need to revolve around their expectations. I had Jake, and I had the future we were building together. We had decided to take a trip to the coast, just the two of us. It had been a while since we had taken time away from everything, and we both needed it. As we stood on the beach, the cool wind brushing against our faces, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. There, with Jake by my side, I realized that my parents' rejection no longer had the power it once did. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I had let go. "You okay?" Jake asked, looking at me with concern. I smiled, feeling more at peace than I had in a long time. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I think I'm finally ready to move on." Jake took my hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was free. Free from the past, free from the expectations of others, and free to live my life on my own terms. It was a new beginning, and this time, I was ready to embrace it. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face it with Jake by my side, and for the first time, I was confident in my own strength. I had spent so much time trying to heal from the hurt my parents had caused that I didn't realize how much I had grown until one particular moment. The feeling of rejection had faded into the background, and I was now living my life on my terms. Every day with Jake felt like a new chapter, one that was full of promise and love. But despite this newfound peace, there was still the lingering thought that I had to face my past. My mom's apology had been the first step in healing, but it wasn't enough to just hear the words. I needed to see action, to feel like she truly understood the damage that had been done. I had decided that it was time to visit them, to face the ghosts of the past, and see if there was any possibility of rebuilding what had been broken. Jake was supportive, as always, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He knew how difficult this would be for me. The thought of confronting my parents again, after everything that had happened, was overwhelming. But I couldn't let fear stop me from moving forward. I had to do this for myself. I had to know if there was a chance for reconciliation, or if I would have to let go completely. The drive to their house felt longer than it had ever been before. The road seemed endless, and with each passing mile, my heart beat faster. When we finally arrived, I sat in the car for a moment, collecting myself. "Are you sure you're ready?" Jake asked softly, his hand resting on mine. I nodded, even though I wasn't entirely sure. "I have to be," I said quietly. "For me." As we walked up to the front door, I felt like I was stepping into a different world, one that I had left behind a long time ago. My parents' home looked the same, but it felt different. There was an unfamiliar weight in the air, a tension that I hadn't felt before. When my mom answered the door, there was a moment of silence between us. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't just the distant, cold look that had always been there. It was something more vulnerable, something that made my heart ache. "Samantha," she said softly, stepping aside to let us in. "I'm glad you came." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. We sat down in the living room, the same room where we had spent so many family holidays together, but it felt emptier now. My mom apologized again, but this time, her apology felt different. It wasn't just words. It was a recognition of the pain she had caused, and for the first time in years, I saw her trying to understand. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice shaky. "I was wrong. I should have been there for you, and I wasn't." I listened, but part of me was still guarded. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that things could go back to how they were, but I had to be cautious. I couldn't let the past repeat itself. "I'm not sure where we go from here," I said, my voice steady but unsure. "But I can't pretend everything is okay. I need time to figure out what this all means." She nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I understand," she whispered. And for the first time, I truly felt like we were on the same page. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew that I had taken the first step toward healing. Whether or not my relationship with my parents would ever be the same, I had learned that I didn't need them to define my happiness. That was something I had already found within myself. I knew that the path to healing was far from over, but in that moment, sitting in my parents' living room, something shifted inside me. For so long, I had clung to the hope of a perfect family, to the belief that things could go back to the way they were. But I was beginning to understand that sometimes, the hardest thing to do is let go of the past. My mom's apology had been genuine, and in her eyes, I saw a glimpse of the mother I had longed for. But I also knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending that everything would be fixed overnight. It was going to take time for both of us. As we sat there, quietly talking, I realized that I didn't need to rush into a decision. I didn't need to force a relationship that wasn't ready to be rebuilt. But I also didn't have to shut her out completely. I could move forward at my own pace, with the understanding that I had the power to decide what role she played in my life. The conversation didn't bring all the answers I was looking for, but it gave me something more important, a sense of peace. I had been carrying around so much anger and pain for so long, and now, I was beginning to feel like I could breathe again. I wasn't going to allow their actions to define me anymore. I wasn't going to allow their mistakes to weigh me down. After that visit, things weren't perfect, and they wouldn't be for a long time. But I was no longer stuck in the past. I had made peace with my parents, and I was learning to make peace with myself. Jake had been my rock through all of this, but now, I was starting to see that I had the strength to stand on my own. I had grown in ways I never thought possible. I had discovered that true healing comes from within. It wasn't just about forgiving my parents. It was about forgiving myself for the years I had spent trying to be someone I wasn't. It was about letting go of the need for validation from people who would never truly understand me. With Jake by my side, I felt ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. I wasn't the same person I was when I first walked into this journey. I had become stronger, more resilient, and more confident in who I was. And that, I realized, was all I ever needed to move forward. I never thought I would reach this point, but here I was, standing on the edge of a new chapter in my life. I had spent so much time in pain, questioning my worth, doubting myself because of my parents' rejection. But now, after everything, I realized that I was the one who held the power to change my future. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about embracing what I had now and moving forward with the strength I had discovered within myself. My parents had hurt me, yes, but they no longer controlled my happiness. I didn't need their approval anymore. The moment I realized that, I felt an incredible sense of freedom. I no longer had to chase after their love or validation. I had Jake, and with him, I was building a life that made me proud. I was starting to see that the love and support I had been longing for had always been right in front of me. It wasn't just in the love from family that I had hoped for. It was in the love Jake and I shared, and in the way I began to love myself. I was still healing, but I had learned how to embrace the process. I didn't need everything to be perfect. I just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Jake and I started planning for our future, talking about the dreams we had, the life we wanted to build together. I wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I was no longer carrying the weight of my past. I was walking alongside Jake, building a future based on mutual respect, love, and understanding. There were moments of doubt, moments when the scars of the past would come rushing back, but I had learned to sit with those feelings, to acknowledge them without letting them control me. I was stronger than I had ever been, and every day, I was more confident in who I was becoming. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer afraid to live it. I was no longer afraid to be me. And with that, I realized that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for all along. The peace wasn't in the approval of others, but in the love I had for myself and the love I had in my life. It had taken time, but I was finally at peace with who I was, and that was all I needed. I had been thinking a lot about what came next for me and Jake. We had come so far, and yet, there was still so much left to figure out. We had both spent so much time trying to heal from our pasts, but I knew now that the work wasn't finished. It was a continuous journey, a process that required patience, understanding, and the willingness to confront our own fears. But I felt stronger now, more confident in myself and in my ability to navigate this new chapter of my life. We had built something special together, and I wasn't going to let anything jeopardize that. As we talked about our future plans, whether it was travel, new goals, or growing our family, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had finally realized that I didn't need to rely on anyone else's approval to feel fulfilled. I didn't need my parents' blessing to move forward with my life. The love and support I had from Jake was enough. It had always been enough. Of course, there were still moments of doubt. There were times when I would catch myself wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was truly moving in the right direction. But then I would look at Jake, see the love in his eyes, and I would remember that I wasn't alone in this. We were in it together, and together, we could face whatever came our way. As the months passed, I continued to grow stronger. I started to understand that my happiness was not determined by my past or by what others thought of me. It was something I created within myself, day by day, choice by choice. And with Jake by my side, I felt like I could handle anything. We celebrated our first wedding anniversary with a quiet weekend getaway. It was just the two of us, no distractions, no pressures, just time to reflect on everything we had been through and how far we had come. As we walked along the beach, hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for everything in my life. I had faced so many challenges, and yet, here I was, standing tall, surrounded by love. I had learned that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't something you could rush or control. It came in waves, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a force that took your breath away. But it was always moving forward. And I was moving forward with it. I didn't know what the future held, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had everything I needed right here, in my heart, and in the life I was building with Jake. We had our struggles, our ups and downs, but we had learned how to work through them together. And that was something worth celebrating. I had started to realize that the healing process was never linear. It wasn't a straight path that I could follow, and it certainly didn't have a clear end. There were days when everything felt right, when I felt in control, when I was at peace with my choices, and when I didn't feel like I was constantly searching for approval. But there were still moments when doubt crept in, when the past tried to claw its way back into my present. I couldn't erase the years of disappointment, the heartache, and the rejection from my parents. But I was beginning to understand that I didn't have to. Those moments of doubt didn't define me anymore. I had Jake, and that was enough. He had been my constant through everything, and I could feel the strength of his love in the way he held me, in the way he listened, and in the way we built our life together. We had learned to communicate, to work through our differences, and to never take each other for granted. I had discovered a sense of independence that I hadn't known I was capable of, and it wasn't about pushing people away. It was about realizing that my happiness wasn't dependent on anyone else but me. I didn't need my parents' approval to feel worthy. I didn't need to prove anything to them. It was a hard truth to face, but it was also one of the most freeing realizations of my life. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our home, watching the sun set and feeling the cool breeze, Jake turned to me and said, "I'm proud of you." At first, I didn't understand why he said it. But as I looked at him, I realized that he wasn't just proud of the person I was becoming. He was proud of the fact that I was starting to believe in myself. I was starting to stand up for myself, to make choices that were right for me, without second-guessing everything. It was a quiet, yet monumental shift. I had learned how to put myself first without feeling guilty, how to trust myself without needing external validation. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect to be. But I was real, and I was learning to embrace every part of myself, both the strengths and the weaknesses. We had plans for the future, things we wanted to do together, dreams we wanted to chase. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding on to the idea of a perfect future. I was content in the now. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew that I wasn't facing it alone. I had Jake by my side, and together, we were building something beautiful. As we held hands and watched the stars slowly appear in the night sky, I realized that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally accepted myself. I had healed, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it. I had reached a point in my life where I was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past. I had spent so much time trying to repair the damage done by my parents, and while there were still some scars left, I no longer felt like they controlled my happiness. I had made peace with the fact that things weren't perfect, and maybe they never would be, but I was okay with that. Jake and I had found a rhythm in our lives together, and that was all that mattered. Every day with him was a reminder of how far we had come. I had started to understand that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval. It came from within, and that was a powerful realization. We had settled into a peaceful routine, filled with quiet evenings, laughter, and moments of shared understanding. The weight of the past didn't haunt me anymore. I had learned to live for myself, to embrace the freedom of being who I truly was. There were moments, though, when I would still wonder about my parents. Had they really changed? Would they ever truly accept me for who I was? But those thoughts were becoming less frequent. The more I lived for myself, the more I realized that I didn't need their validation to be happy. It was a hard lesson to learn, but I had finally understood it. Jake was my partner, my best friend, and the person who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Together, we had built something beautiful, and I was finally starting to feel like I was worthy of it. I wasn't looking for perfection anymore. I had come to accept that life was messy and complicated, but that didn't make it any less beautiful. In fact, It made it all the more real. There was still so much ahead of us, so many dreams we wanted to chase, and I was excited for what the future held. I knew there would be challenges, but I also knew that with Jake by my side, we could face anything. As I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I had finally found peace. It wasn't in the approval of my parents or in anyone else's expectations. It was in the love I had for myself and the love I shared with Jake. That was enough. I had let go of the past, and I was finally ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. With each passing day, I was becoming more and more confident in who I was. And for the first time in my life, I was truly content.